Okay, welcome back to our Agentcore training. What we're doing is going through Amazon's Bedrock Agentcore samples. And what we're doing is we clone the repo. We're looking at the files here, and we're running PyCharm, which is using a virtual environment, which is defined by this variable. Now, if you look down below, you'll see that my command line is prefixed with v and v dot venv. So I'm in the same virtual environment in the command line as this project is. So keep that in mind that with the Amazon Bedrock Agentcore samples, you have to set up a virtual environment in that top level folder, and you could run all these tutorials using that virtual environment. And so that's what I'm doing. So what we're doing now is we're going into the tutorials. We're looking at the Agentcore runtime, and then we're looking at a Langgraph demo. And this particular demo, what it does is it runs an agent on your laptop, and then it deploys the agent to Agentcore and runs an example where you hit on the endpoint that's running in Agentcore. So it does two things, keep that in mind. And so the images here, this directory here is the images showing up in the markdown. There's a README file, there's a requirements file, and there's this Jupyter Notebook, which I'm running here, which tells me everything about the demo that you need to know. Now, just point out in the process, we write this file, which turns out to be like the endpoint that we're running locally, but it's also the endpoint file which is running as an app endpoint within Agentcore. And we also have the YAML file. So we could take a look at all of these later, but I think the first thing we should do is point out that on our laptop we're running, we're using Python, we're installing all the requirements, and then we're running an endpoint, not an endpoint, a program here, which is written. And then after we do that and we test this agent locally, what we do is we rewrite this file and generate the YAML and a Docker file, which will run the Python install using this requirements file and the Docker file and the ECR registry and stuff like that. So there's two pieces to this. Okay, so let's look at the Jupyter Notebook that's given to us. Okay, and it basically tells us before we deploy our agents to Agentcore runtime, let's develop them locally for experimental process. So they show you this little picture, and the user's making a request, and in the local environment, it talks to the agent, which in this case is a LangChain. Well, it's a Langgraph agent. And the agent has two tools, get weather, which always returns sunny, and calculate, which there's tools where you could put in an expression and it would calculate. So the tools are rather simple. And when we use the LLM, it goes to the cloud and it invokes the LLM API and processes the outputs. So this is the first step. So now keep in mind that you need credentials to access the cloud. I'm running on my local laptop, my Macintosh, so it's using my credentials file probably, right? And then and also in our local environment, we're creating a Langgraph agent with two tools. And we're using the proper packages to make that happen outside of Agentcore. So that is the first step. And then what it says is just to go another step further, you can define and use decorators and instantiate a runtime, and in a couple of lines of code, you could turn this into something that's callable in Agentcore, which is in the cloud. So it's two examples. One, the agent, you're in a local environment running this. The second one, everything goes into the cloud and you're using Agentcore. So first, let's take a look at this. There was some install here that I installed before, which means that up in the virtual environment, I should definitely have everything that I installed. If we find out that's not the case, I'll have to run it again. This does a force reinstall. I did that a couple of minutes ago. So now we have to prepare the agent for deployment on an Agentcore runtime. Okay, so we import the runtime app. This is for deployment on the Agentcore runtime. What you do is you import the Bedrock Agentcore app. You instantiate it and create an app. You define an endpoint decorator, and then in the main program you type run. So this is all you have to do to make it totally within Agentcore, and taking your local code and turning it into a deployable package to Agentcore. But I will show you that in a minute. Okay, so let's see. So let's, and we're importing tools, and we have a tools calculator which takes an expression string, and what it does is it looks at the expression and it tries to use this safe dictionary to determine which function to use. And so it evaluates this expression using this safe dictionary, and you get a result. Okay, so that's the first tool. You could implement that any way you want to. If there is an error, there's certain exceptions that are caught here: zero division error, value error, syntax error, exception. Okay. And then there's a weather tool. The weather tool is very simple. It's hard-coded. It returns sunny. It uses this tool annotation. And what it means in this file is that this file contains tools for the agent. Now we're going to create the agent. There's a create agent function here. It uses a langchain underscore AWS. It imports a chat Bedrock. And a lot of these examples a little different, same concept, but you do want as much consistency as possible, because it gets a little confusing with the different types of frameworks. Now we initialize the LLM. Here we're pointing to Anthropic Huku. We have the temperature is 0.1. The smaller the temperature, the more precise; the larger the temperature, more creativity. Think of it as a probability that you're getting more creativity, and so with a smaller temperature, it's going to be a higher probability that we're going to get the more common result. We define the tools. We bind the tools to the large language model. Okay, we define a system message. Yes, you could do simple math calculation and tell the weather. And then you define a chatbot using a message state. And you got the LLM with tools, and you invoke it with the message, and you return the response. Now, you create the graph. You're using Langgraph, so you create a state graph, you add the nodes to it, and you add conditional edges, and then you add the edge, and then you set the entry point to chatbot. So, and you compile the graph builder. Okay, now this is our this will be our entry point, but right now we're not using Agentcore, deploying this to Agentcore. We're using it locally. So we have a function here which you give it the payload. You get the prompt from the payload. You invoke the agent. And then you get the response. So in the main program, what you're doing is getting the arguments, parsing it, and you're calling this Langgraph bedrock, and you're passing it to JSON and getting the response, and you're printing the response. So what we did here was we just wrote this file. This file was written with this non-Agentcore runtime code, right? So we're running this locally. Now, this is the code to run the job locally. Now, we're not in a container. We're just running this on the command line in the Jupyter Notebook. And what we're going to do, the most sophisticated thing happening here is that we're using a model ID which is in Bedrock, and we're pointing to it, and when we invoke it, it's got to use my credentials. So my credentials are on my Macintosh under my credentials file in .aws folder. So let's just assume that's happening. So we invoking the agent, and this is basically what we got. So let's try invoking this right here. Now notice we are running locally, pointing to an AWS large language model in Bedrock. And the amazing thing is turning this into an agent that runs an Agentcore is trivial. So that's what they're boasting about, which I agree with. Now, needless to say, you got to know what this Python code is doing. LangChain, Langgraph, strands agents, whatever. You have to know how to write the code. So Amazon has written it for me, which is great, and it runs, which is great. Okay, so now what happened? The weather right now is sunny. It is a nice day out there. So this is the response I got. Now, the tool returns the fact that it's sunny. This extra verbiage here might have came from the large language model. So so this is what so let's recap what we did. We created an agent, we created some code, we used Python, we used mycharm, we used a virtual environment, and we used Amazon Bedrock Agentcore samples. We ran this sample. It generated this code, and we ran this code. Now, needless to say, I did install the requirements, so let's assume that worked. Okay, now we're going to prepare the agent for deployment on Agentcore runtime. Now what we have to realize is we need infrastructure. We need a Docker file. The Docker file needs to get registered in the ECR registry. We need a pipeline to run that and deploy that Docker file and run. And what it's going to do is run this. Not necessarily exactly this, because we're going to rewrite over this. Okay, so now here's the simple instructions. We need a Bedrock Agentcore core app. Why? Because all we have to do is instantiate the core app, define an entry point, and run it. So we need an entry point, we need to install app, we need to instantiate an app, and we need to import this thing. That's it. Once we do that, you can deploy this thing to Agentcore. So notice now, what we're going to do is rewrite this file. This file right now does not use Agentcore. This new file that we're writing is going to use Agentcore. So let's see what it takes. We imported state graph, measure state, tools condition, tools node, tools, human message, Bedrock Agentcore app. This is installed. We instantiate an app. We have our two tools that we had, our tool, calculator tool, our tool for the weather, and we use the same code that we used to create the agent. And the only other new thing we did was we created an app entry point. This one. Payload goes into this function. So that's it. Once you do this, we're now writing a new file. We wrote over this file. Now this is the Agentcore code. Now this code needs Agentcore. It has to run inside of Agentcore. It has to. We have to run the install in a Docker file used in a requirements file. We have to create the infrastructure, and we might do some other things which are important. So here, what happens behind the scene? It creates the HTTP server that listens on port 8080. Remember, this thing is now the endpoint. It's going to run in a Docker container, and we're going to hit on it. So it implements the required invocation endpoint for processing the agent's requirements. Implements a ping, and it introduces some error handling. Now, this is the magic of Agentcore. So let's just of implementing the code that way. But let's go a little bit further. Deploying the agent on the Agentcore runtime. We need to create an agent runtime operation. It supports the configuration of our agent, and this way we get hit on it with HTTP, MCP from a client. Now the client is talking to the agent. The client is not the agent. It's talking to an agent. So think of it: client code, customer code, React app, whatever it may be. Okay. Now, it says best practice is to package code as a container, push to ECR using a CI/CD pipeline and infrastructure as code. Okay, in the tutorial we use the Boto 3 SDK to easily package the files to Agentcore. So the first thing we're doing is we're taking all our code. We're creating a Docker file. The Docker file is going to read all the code. It's going to install all the code. It's going to run the Python code. It's going to, do whatever it needs to do. So in order to do this, you need to run some code which uses the runtime. So what we do is we say, okay, we need a runtime, an Agentcore runtime, and we need Boto3, and we're going to use sessions, and we're going to go into region. And so the first thing we do is we create a runtime. The second thing we do is we create an agent. We configure the agent. The agent is this code. Create an execution role, create an ECR, use that requirements file, here's your region, here's your agent name. This thing is configuring the runtime programmatically using the toolkit. So just remember, toolkit, runtime. Okay, now let's run this and see what the response is. Now this is coming out in red. No container engine found. It's going to use the existing Docker file, and it's going to. I ran this before, so there's a Docker file, there's an Agentcore YAML, and so it uses these things. But it should be clear what we're doing at this point. Whereas we were running locally and running Langgraph Bedrock Python code, we are now throwing it into a Docker container, putting it in a registry, running a pipeline, deploying that to Agentcore, and launching it, and then our endpoint will be exposed from Agentcore, and we could look at it. So this is just be careful of this output. Sometimes you have already created the resources and you didn't clean up, and you might get an error. Okay, this looks like it configured everything properly, and you can go through this code and prove to yourself that this is running properly. And you'll also see the ECR being used, the pipeline running. You'll see everything if you go to the Amazon console. Okay, now what we do is we launch. What launching is going to do is use code build to reference the repository and deploy the agent in the runtime where the endpoint is exposed. Right? Remember before we were calling local stuff. Now we gotta call this thing. Okay, so let's see. Okay, let's launch this thing. Agentcore runtime launch. Notice the Agentcore runtime. We instantiated it, and now we're using it. The repository did not exist, so it is creating it. Roles were created. We're now provisioning. Now it's building. Now keep in mind we're using this Docker file and this YAML file. Now notice we got an error. Okay, it's telling me to check the agent ID, and let's try that again. Okay, so we definitely have to fix this. Agent name. Okay, this is where I'm going to fix this. I'm going to put a 2 here. You know, let me put a 21 here because I know I've done this before. So let's run this. We're going to run this cell again. Now I have a different agent. Okay, I'm already done. So let me, this launch failed. Let me run this again. Now I could have done 2 things, right? I could have went over to the Amazon console and looked at my agent ID and removed it and tried to figure out how to start over again. Or I could have just changed the agent name and maybe get through this error. So I'm trying this because this worked several times. And I can't, you know, I don't want to go in and out of the console to maintain that right now while I'm doing this video. But it's always good to look at the console and see what's going on. But let's focus on the Python code, the Python runs, and the architecture, what we're really doing, because this is really important to realize that you could experiment locally and run it and deploy it to Agentcore. And like I said, this strands is really beautiful for this, so you should go through some of the strands demos and see. You'll get attracted to it pretty fast. Okay, so I don't know what happened here. The check mark is there. Let's just assume it worked. Checking Agentcore runtime status. Here, you use the Agentcore runtime and you get the status. And you're waiting for the right status. So let's just see what happens. It's ready. The agent is ready in Agentcore to take request. Now when we invoke the agent, where a user is using an application to hit on the endpoint, the runtime endpoint that we just deployed. So the difference is we were hitting on an agent locally on my laptop. Now we're going to AWS and hit on this endpoint. Now remember, all of this is possible because it's using my credentials on my Mac, right? It's got my credentials. It's deploying in my dev environment in my Amazon account. It's and it's using the credentials to hit on the service. So I'm in the West region in a particular account, now I'm going to invoke this thing. Okay, so I'm in my notebook. I'm still in my PyCharm. I'm in my notebook. I am on the client. I'm in my laptop. I'm on my laptop, right? Let's invoke this. And here's the response. 2 + 2 is 4. So this response gave me the results. So this worked. Let's see what we're doing here. Processing invocation results. We can now process our invocation results to include it in an application. Let's see what the heck this is. Yes, so this is the snippet of code that processes the response and gives me good markdown, right? Now, what I'm doing here is this is using the agent run core. Now I'm using the I'm invoking the Agentcore runtime with Boto3. So I'm using the SDK here to run this. So let's see what this looks like. I'm importing Boto3. I got a large result agent ARN. I instantiate Boto3 with Bedrock Agentcore and the region. So I'm pointing to a region on Agentcore. It's pointing to my AWS account, which is coming out of my credential file, and I believe it is my development account. And I think it might have even printed out my account beforehand to verify, or else it's going to do it here. Okay, Agentcore client. So you create an Agentcore client using Boto3. Point to Bedrock and the region. Invoke agent runtime. Agent runtime. You give it the ARN of the agent. What is the weather now? You give it the payload. And now, after you invoked, you process the results. Okay, so you're getting the lines. Else you throw exceptions. Else you're going to throw an exception. So let's see what happens here when I run this. The weather right now is sunny. Now, what's the difference between this one and the previous example we did? This is calling the endpoint in Agentcore. So this is my client code using the SDK. It is calling, it's invoking the agent runtime, and it's invoking the agent in AWS. Okay, so that is the difference here is we're invoking, we have an application using Boto 3, which is invoking the endpoint. Whereas before, when we first ran this program, we were just calling an agent in our local environment, which was using its own tools, but the LLM was in Amazon. So I have nothing but good things to say about this repository. It is really a fantastic way to learn. I suggest you go through the examples. And let's take a look at one more thing now. Let's not forget, we got to clean up or else we're going to be charged for stuff that we're doing. I have an agent running an Agentcore. I got roles. I got things going on here. So just one note about that. That we use an Agentcore control client to point to Bedrock Agentcore control. That is the thing that we use to clean up or other type of operations we might want to do. So with this control client, I could delete agent runtime, delete the repository. So let's do that before I forget. Let me see. It wants me to run this. Let's run this. The ECR URL, the agent ID, and so notice we had start 21 here to get through our problem. And this is my Amazon account. So you figured out which account I was using in my credential file. And then it gave me some references to the ECR. So let's run this and clean up the resources. And not all the files do a good job cleaning up. Just remember that. This looks like garbage. Let me run it one more time. Okay, so got a conflict here. I'm wondering, did I need to use that name again? Started this, started this. Launch result, agent ID. Okay, I'm gonna have to go to the console. What I could do is try running this over and go to the console, and I'm gonna have to go to the console anyway and clean this up. There's no doubt. But before we end the video, I want to do this. I want to show you that these files were generated, right? So this Docker file, was generated for me, and you'll see it's quite easy because my code knows what I'm trying to do here, right? It's using a container, a Python container, working directory app. It's doing a pip install with the requirements file. It copied the requirements file first onto the Docker image. Then it ran it. And then it installed the OpenTelemetry. This is another thing which is kind of tricky. Let's not get into that. But it has the region. It added the user called Bedrock Agentcore, defined some ports, copied everything, and then it just ran the command. So this was the endpoint. It's doing this OpenTelemetry instrument before this, so you could see the observability within Agentcore, which you can look at. We can look at before. Okay, so that's just want to point out there's some things that got created here automatically using magic. I just want you to know that. And then there was this file here, which we took for granted. And this was the CloudFormation that defined the infrastructure. We have a default agent. It's Python. We have an entry point. The entry point is this. We have a role, execution role. We have my account. We have an ECR repository. And agent ID, ARN, session ID, code build. Now it has a code build section, project name, execution role, source bucket, and memory, no memory, blah, 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 some information about the memory. The JWT was disabled. There's no auth here. Just a lot of stuff written for me, which I would hate to have to write myself, right? So this is good stuff. And so just keep that in mind. The truth of the matter is this code generated all this. I could remove this, I could remove this, and it would generate these two files again when I ran the code. Okay, so that's what we really wanted to show. This was a Langgraph example. I suggest you go through the strands example and compare it to the Langgraph. It looks a lot simpler, but that's all I wanted to show. Thank you for joining.